Hi everyone, I'm Patrick Samuel.
And I'm Hakon X.
Together we are the neurodiverse band Visual Symphonia, a dark rock band based in London. We're both musicians, but also visual artists.
When we met, neither of us knew we are neurodiverse in more than one way, and we both had a lot of trouble coping. Today we sometimes joke, back then it was like we tried to build a car with wooden wheels, a wooden engine and wooden gears, and goes without saying it wouldn't start.
Today we're going to tell you how we eventually learned to manage our autism, synesthesia and misophonia together in the past 22 years. And the images you'll see in our presentation, if they're not photos, are drawings from my autism book, The Sound of Purple, or artwork from our latest album, Fire and Rain. You may remember me from past years here at the show. Sometimes I've had purple here. I'm diagnosed with autism, ADHD, marked anxiety, low mood, dyslexia and dyspraxia, and I have synesthesia. I've previously spoken about my path to diagnosis and how I've used daily art and music therapy as a coping mechanism. But this year, it's a story of two, as my coping mechanisms have become my life, and the person who supported me and mentored me for 2 decades is no longer the man in the background, but here, center stage, and beside me.
I'm originally from Germany, born in East Berlin, where I also grew up and studied law, worked as a TV journalist, and literally experienced what it means when the whole world opens up. That was during the night the wall came down. I've been living in London for 20 years now, much of the time working in the media industry, making documentaries and looking after home entertainment releases for major film studios. For the last 10 years though, I've been Patrick's full-time carer and PA. Being with him has helped me recognize my own diversity, and it was only whilst undergoing post-cancer therapy last year that I was initially diagnosed with being on the spectrum with ADHD, dyspraxia, and a rarely discussed condition called Misophonia.
Hakon and I first met in Berlin in 2002. I'd been living there for a few years and I was working as a play worker at an international school. It was a part-time job with only a few hours a day, which allowed me to spend most of my time making music. Yet I was struggling with day-to-day things like socializing, getting around, and managing all sorts of things like reading my mail and not knowing how to pay my bills. The fact that I didn't speak German didn't help anything either.
And I was working very long hours at the TV station, reporting and producing a weekly news program. Mostly my fridge was keeping just the yogurt and the juice box cool. I was away a lot. And when I met Patrick, I had just come back from shooting a documentary in Tokyo. At this time, I had been through a number of traumas. I went through the first one at the age of 7 when I witnessed the crash of a 156 passenger jet, and followed by a number of incidents in years after. For a long time after I met Patrick, I was regularly having night tremors and night terrors, and a lot of things I hadn't dealt with were bubbling to the surface.
The day we met, the world felt a little less confusing because we understood each other so well. I could talk to him about anything: music, art, films, science, philosophy, physics. We were both nutty about the X-Files and Twin Peaks, and I introduced him to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and he introduced me to The Matrix. We also realized we were similar in the way we experienced the world, in a not quite neurotypical way, and that we both had been more or less outsiders our whole lives.
When Patrick's job at the school ended, I realized, and was forced to return to London, I realized that my life was no longer in Berlin either. So in 2004, I moved to London. Living with him, I started to learn more about how he would struggle with getting around, using public transport, meeting people, on how he was unable to cope in the workplace. I would either have to accompany him to social events or keep in touch with him on the phone to help him get around.
Living with Hakon, I began to notice things too, and not just about myself. Hakon would constantly need to keep busy with at least 2 activities at the same time. His mind would need constant stimulation, and he would never be able to just be still. And because of not being still, he'd often bump into things around him, namely me. Whilst I would find it difficult to handle sensory overload, I observed that Hakon would become increasingly agitated with very specific sounds. Crisp packets rustling, the sound of chewing, neighbors playing bass-heavy music, and people shouting when talking in public spaces.
Misophonia is an extreme reaction to everyday sounds, mostly made by people, that others find relatively easy to ignore, if they notice them at all. As a child, my parents would often tell me off for getting angry about those sounds, or just wanting to run away. This would continue for the rest of my life. People would find my reactions to certain sounds or noises disproportionate, everyone but Patrick. He was the one who was doing the research and told me it's a known condition. And for me, it was a revelation because it's not something I can easily control and have difficulties managing very often.
The other thing that makes Hakon's condition challenging is that he's had to deal with tinnitus in his left ear for most of his life. This stems from childhood, when he was frequently slapped by his father, something he finds difficult to speak about, which is why I'm saying this part. His form of tinnitus is quite specific in tone and range, and at times when it's particularly unbearable, his misophonia can easily be triggered as well. But we've learned how to make certain adjustments in daily life to accommodate not just for my sensory overload, but his. What overstimulates him is often the same for me. By creating a low stimuli environment at home, it has helped us both remain creative, although our neighbors can cause this to go awry sometimes, either by having loud parties that go on until the morning, mowing their lawns for hours on end, or using leaf blowers or cutting concrete. These can be especially difficult days.
Although there's no cure for misophonia or tinnitus, by instinctively creating a low stimuli environment for him, he's right that it helps me as well. Other adjustments made for him have greatly benefited me too. Going to the cinema only on early showings means that it's mostly empty. I don't have to deal with the rustling food packets or people talking. Walking quieter streets with Patrick helps me keep away from honking car horns and other traffic noise. Patrick being on the Motability scheme enables us to avoid the sensory onslaught of public transport. Shopping at quieter times means I can avoid much of the machines that beep and could trigger an episode.
Other things which have benefited us both are only using certain streaming services to avoid advertisements, only eating at empty places if we go out for a meal, standing at a certain distance from the speakers at gigs and clubs, wearing frequency filtering earbuds when necessary, using a fan to drown out outside noise at home, or a white noise machine to sleep at night when the neighbors are outside. These are just a few of the examples of how we manage sensory overload, tinnitus, and misophonia.
Yeah, and by the way, the white noise machine is really the top cure for my misophonia, because or even tinnitus, and because it just drowns out everything else, even if it's loud. So it's like you don't hear anything else, and yeah, it's like peace all of a sudden. And yeah. Another thing we tend to look out for when considering triggers is how Patrick experiences synesthesia. Synesthesia is a condition that causes people to experience 2 or more senses at the same time. It varies case by case, and for Patrick, it's he can hear colors, and he can basically paint music. So for him, sound and colors are the two senses he usually experiences at the same time. When lights are too bright, this can trigger auras, though, which can lead to migraine and aphasia. This can affect his ability to communicate and to read and write. These episodes can last a few days. That's why we avoid places where there's too much going on, and he always wears prescription glasses and a hat.
One of the good things about my synesthesia, though, is that it can help me with art and music. Certain colors and patterns can trigger a wealth of sounds. There's a certain shade of orange that sounds like the lower E string on an upright bass being bowed, whereas brighter tones such as the high E string on a guitar feels a bit more yellow. However, it can be distracting when working, and I've trained myself over the years to block out much of these stimuli and just focus on what's tangibly in front of me.
It can be difficult to find stillness in the world around me, but Patrick helped me rediscover a passion of mine that had laid dormant for decades. As a teenager, I was an avid glider back in Berlin, but I had never been back up there in the cockpit, since I had an accident that left me in a brace for months and with a hairline fracture in my neck. But Patrick got me back into a glider this year, and it felt like I'd never stopped. Not only is it great seeing the world from a different perspective, but the wind noise of the aircraft cancels out the tinnitus as well.
Since being on the Motability scheme, I've been able to get around to places which I'd never been able to travel to before. Because it's an electric vehicle, it's very quiet, and we found this helps Hakon as well. It doesn't have the whirring of a petrol car. We found that visiting the coastline can ease his condition as well. The sound of the waves crashing acts as a natural white noise machine, and a good couple of hours walking around the coastline of Whitby, for example, can give him at least a week's worth of peace.
One of the things I noticed living with Patrick was how often he was plagued by stomach cramps and bowel problems. These would be made worse by anxiety, for example, when he had to travel the next day. I finally been able to switch him over to a more consistent and healthy diet, since I too had to change my diet following my cancer treatment. This has been working well for him, especially together with his tailored medication for ADHD, anxiety, and outbursts. Together with his creative therapies and activities, this is the support that's helping him to lead a much happier life than when I met him. It's been a long road, though.
I'm so lucky to have a great network of support, and there's much that I'm grateful for that I didn't have when we first met. I've even been able to maintain some close friendships now, and Hakon plays a big part in that. I rely on him to help me respond when I falter a bit with things like listening, focusing, responding, and that pesky thing called showing empathy. He's helped me to recognize when I need to step away as well from social activities and to take a break from social media and even from reading the news, as a lot of these things still feel really alien to me.
Recognizing and acting on Patrick's difficulties in everyday life has helped me realize my own, that I find it hard to connect with others in conversations, to hold chit-chat and to gossip. Physical contact is not easy for me either, hugging and shaking hands, for example. I'm glad that Patrick never wants to hold hands when we go out, except maybe when he needs to cross the road, because then he needs help. Even our wedding 2 years ago was organized to take all these adjustments into consideration.
Since we've always done everything together, from running an online film journal or a short film night, from DJing our own club nights to making short films, one of the things in recent years we've really enjoyed was working on music. When I was signed to the neurodiverse label Tiergarten Records as a solo artist, Hakon helped me put together those music releases and videos, and he worked on all the photography too. He also supported me on stage when I'd have to perform.
But it was when Patrick decided in February last year that we should be a band, and then surprised me by getting me a bass guitar so I can be the bass player, then that I started my latest career. I've been playing bass and other instruments a lot in my previous lives, and getting back into it felt a bit like rejuvenation. Forming Visual Symphonia has been unlike anything I've ever done before. It's even more work than when I was a lawyer or working at the TV station. The way Patrick works on music, together with his ability, to pick up any instrument and learn it, means we now have 50 songs to release over 3 albums in the next 12 months.
Hakon's work with Visual Symphonia doesn't end with him just playing bass. He's also the band's producer and sound engineer. He oversees all the mixing and mastering, and you may think that his conditions might be a problem, but in this case it's actually a big advantage because he knows exactly what frequencies to look for, what harshnesses stand out, and for example, the loud S's I make when I'm singing. His own form of ADHD gives him a hyper-focus as well. Whilst my own neurodiversity allows for bursts of energy at certain periods during the day that aids my creativity, I'll usually burn out really quickly and have to stop before overstimulation sets in. Hakon, on the other hand, is able to begin working on our songs from 5 a.m. and usually pushes through until about 7 or 8 p.m., meticulously working through the demos I've given him.
What I usually get from Patrick is a folder with around 40 stems. So stems are basically the audio file that make up a song. Patrick tends to give me, for example, 5 drum and percussion tracks, 10 vocal tracks with him doing the main vocal and all the backing vocals and the backing vocals in different ranges, then up to 10 guitar files, and then the rest can be other instruments he's recorded, like his sitar, banjo, trombone, harmonica, or keyboard. And you actually never know what you're going to get when he's working, depending on the mood he's in on that day.
And from that, Hakon builds the worlds that I imagined, filling in the gaps here and there where I might have fallen short. Our first official release as a band is the 15-track Fire and Rain, which we thought we'd release last year, but we ended up redoing the album completely and even adding new songs that weren't there last year. It's a dark rock opera infused with Eastern flavors that represents our Indian and German heritages, and it's an album created by 2 souls who never felt like they were meant for this world, but somehow managed to find each other.
Playing bass with Patrick has given me a grounding that I didn't even know I was missing. Often he'll write a bass line for me, and usually he apologizes before it hands it to me because he knows I'll be jumping frets like a grasshopper with my fingers. But he manages to combine dark rock with Eastern scales in a way I've never encountered before, so it's a real challenge. And I'm also creating my own bass lines, like on the title track and on the first single, A Kiss in the Shadows.
I wish I could meet teenage me and tell him that things would turn out okay. That in 2024, I'll be rocking blonde hair, corsets, and leather trousers and strutting around on stage. Because in everything that I've done so far in my life, being on stage, especially with Hakon, that's the happiest I've ever been. All anxiety, all sensory issues, all the complexities of my neurodiversity, all of that fades away, and I'm someone else when those lights come on, the fog fills the air, and our music starts playing.
Together, we continue to find ways to ease and manage each other's difficulties. We've been doing that for 22 years now. 2 neurodiverse guys who against all the odds would meet on a Sunday outside a cinema in Berlin. But it is constant work, seeing what Patrick is able to do, what he's interested in, where his special interests lie, and building on that so he doesn't get lost or falls back into negative patterns. It's about building routine, but with enough room for change so that his autistic and ADHD mind can be catered for.
Whether it's creating a graphic novel, a painting, an album, or even just a different look for the day, I find that within my daily routine, I really need the freedom for these changes when I get the urge. The life we've been able to build allows for all of that to happen, and I know Hakon feels the same way. Our life together and how we cope with these challenges. Being different is good sometimes, but being different together, now that's something that's really great.
In many ways, our album Fire and Rain reflects our story and who we are. It's confrontational, probably uncomfortable for some, unapologetic, and at times willfully unromantic. It's our refusal to fit into any one box, lyrically or musically. As a neurodiverse band, we invite listeners to experience our songs for what they are, just as we are coping with a world that feels utterly alien to us most of the time. We cannot change, and we couldn't deliberately make music in the vein of anything else, even if we wanted to.
That's a sentiment that's heard throughout the album. Quite seriously so, but often tongue-in-cheek as well. From the non-acceptance of a world that's corrupt to defying religious prejudice, finding our kind of peace, and finally being able to be happy with who we were all along. The album is a journey that came to life through a blend of our musical worlds. Though it's dark rock at its core, we've never been afraid of wandering outside of that box. Electric guitars and deep bass lines mesh with sitars, shimmering tones, and hypnotic pulses of the santur, for example. The album features almost 30 instruments. We'd like to invite you to follow us on Bandcamp, and we'll tell you more about it, and open you up to even more neurodiverse artists who were on the Tiergarten Records label as well, and to come to our table outside and have a chat.
Outside upstairs.
Outside upstairs. We know that's been quite a lot of information, and sometimes I like to do a bit of stand-up, so please indulge me with this really bad joke that I have to tell. We decided to become a wooden band. So we got together, we got a bunch of wooden instruments, wooden guitar, wooden flute, wooden keyboard, wooden drums. We made the album, we put it on Bandcamp, and you know what? It wouldn't sell. Thank you for listening to us.
Thanks for listening.
If you've got any questions...
Yeah, first of all, give them a round.